What is going on, everyone? This is Ryan with Automatic Comics, and up next, we are going to be talking about the big heritage auction that just happened last week. About $20 million in sales in comics and original art, pulps, that kind of thing. So, big auction, a lot of sales, but was it strong or weak? Let's get into it. All right, so before we get started, please remember to hit that like button and hit the subscribe button if you'd like to see more content like this. So, I did a few preview videos about some of the big books that were coming up in that Heritage auction that just happened last week. The big one, of course, was the Fantastic Four #1, 9.6. We will definitely talk about that in this video as well. But this auction totaled $19,664,000. So just under $20 million in sales. And now that doesn't necessarily mean it's a strong auction. I mean, it's a lot of money that was spent on comics and original art. It means people are willing to spend that money. But how did these books perform versus how I thought they would actually do, like what I thought they would sell for? Now, I was watching approximately 340 books in this auction. I did not price them all out, so I don't have those types of numbers. I was on vacation while this auction was going on, and so I wasn't super focused on it, but there were some books that I was especially interested in. And so I did price out 55 of the books that I was watching. And so take that for what it's worth. It's just a microcosm of all the books that sold in this auction. But out of those 55 books that I priced, 34 went above my estimates and 21 went below my estimates. So at least from that, looking at that, seems like a pretty strong sale. And that actually aligns well with what I saw with Comic Link with their big auction that they had a couple weeks ago, where it seemed like the higher end books were doing very well, or actually quite stable, or even on the strong side. Saw that again here in the Heritage auction. Because you got to remember, these are the big books. Like, this is the auction where you're generally not seeing books sell below $1,000. And a lot of the time you're seeing them sell for 10,000 up to 100,000. And in this auction, we had one that broke 2 million. So these are the big books. It's not necessarily the same people that are buying these, that are buying books that are in the $500 price point and the $10 price point, all that kind of thing. Now, for those outsized sales, either on the upside or the downside, I had 20 of these 55 beat my estimate by 20% or more, and only 7 went 20% or more below my estimate. So again, does appear to be on the strong side, at least from my pricing. And like I've said, I've priced a lot of books over the last about 5 or 6 years, like tens of thousands of books. I'm fairly comfortable with my pricing. Now with these books, these tend to be more expensive, more rare. They don't sell quite as often, so you can have a little more fluctuation in them. But overall, did appear to be a pretty solid auction. And like I said, aligned well with that Comic Link auction that happened a couple weeks ago. Now, let's start getting into this. So this is kind of the little overview of this auction. So you can see here on the right-hand side, you've got the total sales for that auction, $19,664,368. So a lot of money was spent in this auction. None of it by me. I did try to bid on a couple things. I was going after an original art piece that I was the underbidder on. Sadly, I did not get to take it home. But yeah, I didn't end up taking anything home in this auction. But I still enjoy watching these auctions, these big ones, because you see all the cool stuff, the stuff you just don't see quite as often. And if we kind of organize this from most expensive to least expensive, and I'm actually going to jump all over the place in terms of the books I'm going to talk about here. I'm not just doing the big books, but you can see that that Fantastic Four #1, that was the top sale item, $2,040,000. So it did better than I thought. I had it going for 1.5 to 1.8. So I put my estimate at 1,650,000, you know, like kind of in the middle of that. And it pretty handedly beat my estimate, you know, going over 2 million. I did not think this book would break 2 million, and it just barely did. Then you can see some other books just up at the top here. You've got that Amazing Fantasy 15 9.0. That's actually going to be the first book we're going to talk about. And then a lot of original art. I mean, that original art goes for a lot of money. There's a big demand for it. It's the one of one. And especially when it's big time artists like Lee Elias, Steve Ditko, George Perez, that kind of thing. It's just they go for a lot, especially on key issues. But let's start getting into these books. So, first book, like I said, that we're going to talk about here was this Amazing Fantasy 15 9.0 curator pedigree copy. I talked quite a bit about this book in my prior video because I personally, I don't think this is a 9.0. This book was graded like 23 years ago, and it doesn't feel like it would hold up to a 9.0 in today's grading. And I, that's why I think it's probably still in this old case, but doesn't matter. It's a 9.0 on the label. So it sold for $540,000. I had this book going for 560,000, so only 4% below my estimate. When you're talking about a $500,000 book, that's about as close as you can hope to get. So I'm not going to say it was an underperformer. It's definitely not an overperformer. It sold for what I thought it would sell for. So 540,000, a decent sale for this book. And that's what I've been seeing with Amazing Fantasy 15. It has generally stabilized. We have seen in the lower grades some prices kind of dropping a little bit more, but for the most part, this book has done the majority of its correction, and it's going around where you think it should sell. Another example of that was that there was a 7.5 that also sold later in the auction. That was this book right here. And you can see this 7.5 went for $156,000. I had this one going for 160,000. So it was 3% below my estimate. Again, as close as you can hope to get when you're pricing out books at this type of price point. I mean, if you do a comparison, it's like it sold for $156 and I guessed 160. Yeah, I mean, it's pretty close. And this was a book that I felt it looked like a 7.5, like a 7.75 type book. I had no problems with the grading on this one, but yeah, Amazing Fantasy 15 selling right around where I thought it would. Now, the next book that I want to show is just one that I was watching this one because this might be my favorite Superman cover of all time. And this was one of the first books to sell in this auction, and it had a pretty strong sale. This is Action Comics number 13. I love this cover. With Superman holding back the speeding train, there's just this cover really, really appeals to me. I like this one a lot. I would love to own this one, but $38,400 is a lot of money. I had this one estimated at $33,000. Its prior record was $34,210. So this was a new record for this book in grade and beat my estimate by 16%. So pretty solid, respectable sale for this book. Now, another Golden Age book that I talked about in one of the prior videos that had 2 copies that were selling in this auction sold right after this. And this was All-Star Comics number 8. There was a 4.0 and a 3.5. The interesting thing with this was that I felt like the 4.0 underperformed and the 3.5 sold right around where I thought it would. And like the 4.0 is a good looking book. When you compare the two next to each other, the colors are brighter. It doesn't have the same paper loss that's on the 3.5, but maybe it's because this one sold real early. This was just the 3rd book in the auction. Maybe not enough eyes were on it yet. And someone got a pretty good deal on this book. I've said that before. When you've got these major Grail books like this, I mean, it's the first appearance of Wonder Woman. If you can get them for what I feel is a discount to what their current pricing should be, in my opinion, based on my pricing, then I think that's the time to pick them up. So this one went for $38,400. I had it going for $45,000, went 15% below my estimate. But then we had another copy sold not too long after this, just 22 items later. We had this 3.5 sell. And you can see the colors aren't quite as bright on this one. You've got the little chips on the right-hand side. Went for $34,800. I had this one going for $35,000. So, I mean, pretty much dead on. I mean, almost exactly what I thought this book would go for. And so to me, I think buyer and seller should be happy with this one. With the 4.0, I feel like the person who bought that one I feel like they got a pretty good deal on that book. Now let's jump to the big book, the really big one that sold in this auction. I already talked about it just a little bit, but we have Fantastic Four Number one in a 9.6. It broke that $2 million mark. I did not think, like I said earlier, I did not think that this book would break $2 million. I had it going for 1.5 to 1.8. And so the average of those, it beat my estimate by 24% for a $2 million book. I feel like that's a pretty strong sale. Now, this is, if you compare this to how this book was performing during the comic boom, this book absolutely would have sold for more then. I mean, there's no question about that, but it is still a strong sale for what this book has been doing recently. A lot of other grades dropping down. I mean, this is one of two in a 9.6. It's a white pages copy. This was a solid sale for this book. I mean, I think it's a very respectable sale. Now, one sale later, this one really surprised me. This was Fantastic Four, number 5, 9.2, white pages. I mean, it is a nice looking copy. Again, I talked about this one before. I felt like, maybe more like a 9, maybe even 8.5. But I mean, still, nice looking copy of this book. I mean, from here, you could tell it's a good looking book, but sold for $132,000. This is still way, way up there compared to the prices that this book was going for prior to the comic boom. Now, it is down from its peak sale price. Peak sale price was $180,000. However, I think this book, in theory, probably has a decent way to fall still. Now, there's all this hype around Doom and Robert Downey Jr. and all that. And so that probably played a role. But I had this one going for 100,000. I think in my prior video, I said anywhere from 80 to 120 is where I thought it might go. And it beat that entire range. So beat my $100,000 average price there by 32%, a solid sale, in my opinion, for this book. Now, the next one is one that I got my pricing exactly right on. This was this classic Golden Age cover, Crime Suspense Stories, number 22, the beheading cover by Johnny Craig, sold for $90,000. I thought it would sell for $90,000, so I was just dead on with that one. Its prior record was $90,112, so it sold for almost the exact same price as that prior record for this classic cover in a 9.4. There are actually two graded higher. I believe there's 196 and 198, and so it's not even top of census. And this book went for 90 grand. So it just tells you, how much some of these books can really go for and just how much demand there is out there for these Gaines file copies. That was a question here, is that we had that $90,000 sale before. Was this going to correct from there? I didn't think it would, and it didn't. And, still just strong sale for that book. All right. Now, next one I want to talk about, also one that sold right around what I thought, but definitely a book that I've been telling people to be careful around, to be cautious with. This is Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles number 1. This one is signed on the interior by Kevin Eastman and Peter Laird, a 9.8 white pages copy. I think this was the one that had the little tiny crease up in the corner that I pointed out. But I had this one going for 90,000, went for 87,000. So it 3%, below my estimate, close enough. However, I do think that there's a lot of downside risk with this book. Like I said, I thought it would sell for 90, but I think this book could, in theory, drop down to somewhere between 50 and 60. So I would be very cautious with purchasing this book still right now. It is still very, very elevated from the prices that it was at prior to the comic boom. And that's my general concern with it. I mean, it doesn't mean it's going to drop. It could stay at these levels. That's always possible. But I always think of what's my downside risk. And with this book, I feel like there's still a lot of downside risk with it. Now, the next one that was an underperformer, I'm not extremely surprised about it, though, was Amazing Man Comics number 22. This is the guy punching the Nazi gorilla in the crotch on the cover. A 2.0 off-white pages, sold for $21,600. Now, you might think like, holy cow, like that is a lot of money for this book. And you would be right if one hadn't just sold recently for $43,200. Now, that sale, I was not expecting that to be repeated. That seemed like a huge outlier, a book that had not sold for a pretty long time, and you had one pop up and there was just a lot of demand for it. And this is what you see with these pretty obscure, rare books. There's a lot of demand for them, but once somebody gets their copy, that's one less person that's going to be fighting for that book. And especially when it's the same grade, because then that person isn't even going to be competing to maybe upgrade and then let their copy go. And I think that other one actually looked a little nicer, even though they're both a 2.0. But that's the type of thing that can happen here. That first to market, which was that other one that sold, that got all the bidding around it and went for big numbers. We can actually go check that one out. So we go to Amazing Man number 22. Just so you can see what I'm talking about. I think they both sold on Heritage. This is from Centaur Publications. It's a really obscure publisher, but the people that collect them are, they love those books. So here we go. We've got that $43,200 sale right here. Yes, this was on Heritage, and we can compare the two. And we got this one here. We got this one. The $43,000 book looks brighter. It does have all this tape along the spine, so it depends what you want. But this really, this one sold in April of this year. This was this book that had not come up for sale for a pretty long time. We had a 0.5 cover list that sold. This one was a sale in August for a 1.8. And otherwise, we had the $69,000 sale back in September of 2022. So it hadn't sold for like a year and a half, something like that. And so then just a lot of demand for it. Then you have a few sell all around the same time. We had an April sale, an August sale, a September sale. And so there's only so many people that are really out there looking for that book. And you had a number of them get their copies. And so then this is what happens. You have the prices kind of correct back down. And so that's what I'm always talking about with confirmation sales. When I see a huge sale that I'm just like, I don't know if I believe that sale. And I'm not saying that somebody didn't pay it. I'm saying, I don't know if I believe that's the new market for that book. And so with this one, I didn't really believe that 43 grand was the new market for that book. And that's why my estimate for this one was 27,000. Now it still fell below my estimate. I thought it would go for 27, went for 21.6. So 20% below my estimate, but that's why I wasn't expecting a $43,000 sale. I was expecting something lower, which is what we got. All right, now the next one, I want to talk about this one because it's a book that I own, and so I was pretty happy to see this sale. So this was Detective Comics number 28, the second appearance of Batman. It is one of my keeper books that I picked up earlier this year. I got a 1.0 Universal. This is a 6.0 conserved, and so conservation is just specific types of restoration that have been done to the book. And so we can see here the conservation that was done on this specific copy was cover and centerfold reinforced and staples replaced. So this is an extremely tough book. You just do not see this book come up for sale, which is why I was really happy when I was able to pick one up, because a Detective Comics 27, that first Batman, unlikely I'm going to be getting that book ever just because of the price, but I was able to pick up a universal copy of 28. And so this book I had going for $20,000, went for 28,800, or 44% over my estimate. So definitely a strong sale for that. I've talked about it before. Early detective Batmans, or just golden age detective Batman books, have been getting a lot of attention. To me, I feel like it's one of the hottest markets right now. And this type of sale proves that. Just a big sale. Now we're going to talk about another tech that I was also watching. Definitely surprised me. So that was Detective Comics number 140 and an 8.5, sold for 52,800. This was a new record for this book. Prior record was 43,200. I had this going for 35,000 because in other grades, we've been seeing this book come down. But this was a strong sale for this first appearance of the Riddler, and beat my estimate by 51%. This was a big sale. It's a tough book, and you're not going to see it come up in an 8.5, especially very often. But still, to set a new record, that's always one of those things that when you've had a sale in the comic boom time period. So if we jump over to Detective number 140. When you've had sales in the comic boom time period and then you get sales afterwards and they're higher, that's significant. And so if we check out the 8.5, in 2022, kind of like peak comic boom, a little bit later into it, 43,200, and then setting a new record. So those types of sales to me are very significant, and I try to make note of them. Now, another book, again, some shameless self-promotion, books that I was happy to see sell for some big numbers. Books that are on my keeper list was Mask Comics number 1. Probably my favorite LB Cole cover. I really like this cover. I personally like it more than Mass Comics #2. Some people like the Devil cover more. This one just, I love this cover. I think this one just really catches my attention. And one of the things I said previously that sold me on this book was I saw them both together at someone's house that I went to, and they had a Mask 1 and a Mask 2 right next to each other. And this one to me just blew that other copy away, or blew the other cover away. But I had this going for 16,000. Prior record was 16,866, went for 26,400. This book had felt like it spiked a lot, and then it had just been pretty stable for a while. It hadn't really had any more big kind of outlier type sales or big jumps in sales. And this was a strong sale for this book. It is a good looking 4.5. The main flaw on it, you can see there's this tear. Here, we'll zoom in here. So you can see there's this tear over on the right-hand side, but no big pieces missing. There's some roughness to the spine, but good looking book, great colors, and a solid sale, 26,400, beating my estimate by 65%. So strong sale for that one. Now, jumping to something that's not Golden Age. This is an interesting one. So this is Albedo #2. This is the copy that was owned by Dave over at Comic Book Investments, the other YouTube channel. He put out a video that he was not happy with this sale. Now, personally, this sold exactly what I thought it would sell for. I had it going for 28,000, sold for 28,800. There had been a $55,200 sale earlier this year. There had also been a $25,000 sale in a 9.8 on Comic Link just a few months ago. Now, then Heritage had a big 9.6 sale for 33,000. And to me, again, this is about evaluating those sales and looking at what do you think outliers are? What do you think is a really realistic number for that book? And that $55,000 sale, that was a first to market sale. That was one where Albedo #2 had not sold in a 9.8 for a long time. And so we'll go talk about that a little bit over here on the on GPA. So if we go over here, you can see there was a sale in 2020 for 19,800, a sale in 2018 for 6,800. Then we had this big sale for 55,200 earlier this year. And that felt like so much pent up demand. And so you just get a lot of bidding for that book. But then I felt like this book was really probably worth more like 20 to 25, kind of where it was around 2020. And I really look at that with comparison to books like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles #1, because they are from the similar time period. They have similar print runs, but TMNT is way more popular than Albedo or than Usagi Yojimbo. So that's who this is important for, that first appearance. And so I felt like that this book, because we've been seeing the TMNT #1 dropping in price, this $55,000 sale was way too close to what the TMNT book sells for. And so I felt like 20 to 25 is more like where this book should go. That $33,000 sale, I was like, I just don't buy that sale. Like, again, I think it's a real sale, but I don't think that it's the new market for that book. And so this book selling for 28, it doesn't surprise me. Now, it could have gone higher. It's very possible that could have happened, because when you look at GPA, it doesn't pull in that Comic Link sale. And so then if somebody sees like, 33,000 and they see the 55,000, they're like, you wonder how much they're using that information versus the Comic Link information that isn't there to justify what they want to pay. And so to me, I think this book could still even drop from here. I don't think that this is a disappointing sale. I don't think there's anything wrong with this sale. It's like I said, it's what I thought it would go for. And so that's all I can really say on that. I mean, it's another one of those cases where how many people are out there that want to pay that price for that book? And two other people got their 9.8s very recently. And so they're out of the market now. And so now who's left? And this is who's left. And that's what they were willing to pay, at least that we're watching this auction. Now, it's possible one sells for more later, but I still think this book has some downside risk to it. All right. Now, this sale, I'm going to say right now, I'm talking about it, and I do own a copy, so take that for what it's worth. But I do not think this is a repeatable sale. This This was probably the craziest sale that I saw in this auction. This is Startling Comics number 49. This is the Bender cover. I mean, I love this book. This is probably my favorite cover, bar none, of all time. And it's Alex Schomburg, airbrush, 5.5, sold for $36,000. I had this book going for 17. The prior record was 9,600. This beat my estimate by 112%. A 5.5 just sold on Comic Link a couple weeks ago for like 13. I mean, that person, like I was the underbidder. I am so upset about that one. But I mean, I don't think this is a repeatable sale. I know I get a lot of these comments in here where people think like it's all fake sales and shill bidding and all this stuff. Like, I'm sure that there is some percentage of every auction, you know, whether it's eBay or Comic Link, Comic Connect, Heritage, that there's some shadiness. But I generally think that a vast majority of sales are legit. People are paying for those books and it's fine. I'm sure someone paid for this. Like, I've heard plenty of times about people just getting overexcited during an auction and they keep bidding and they keep bidding. And, you know, you just end up, you pay too much, and it's just, it happens. And I think that's what happened here. I mean, I'm sure they're happy with the book. It is an amazing book, but $36,000 is high. Now, like, for example, there was a very high grade Crippen that sold recently. Now, the colors on that Crippen didn't seem to be as good. And so I think that that's one of the things that hurt that number on that book. But you can see here, this 8.5 Crippen sold for $23,400 in April. Now, if we look at that one, just for comparison, it's like this copy versus this copy. It's like maybe this 5.5 is a little brighter, like a little, not a huge difference, but it's an 8.5. You know, like, it's a stunning book and it's a Crippen pedigree. And this one sold for $13,000 more. Like, that's what I'm talking about. It's where I know anything can happen in an auction, but this sale, like, I don't expect that I can go out. Like, I have a 4.5. I don't expect I can go out and then sell my 4.5 now for like 28,000. I don't see that happening. I think that this is an outlier sale, and I would need to see another sale that justifies this one in the future to think that this is the new baseline for this book. I do not feel like that's the baseline for this book. I feel like this was just a big overpay for the grade. Now, I do think that this one is a steal. If an 8.5 Crippen, like that, and I know who won it. He's on Instagram. So I've seen the post, but like, so I mean, congratulations to him. I think this one was a steal. However, I also think that 5.5 was pretty high, but we'll see. You know, you never know what would potentially happen, you know, if another one comes up for sale, but we'll see. All right, now let's talk about another big underperformer. This one, these are tough because they've gone up a lot and it's hard to know if they're going to correct or not. I feel like it's a relatively small demand for them. This one is Batman number 227. This classic Neil Adams Batman cover. There's nothing really key about this book other than the fact that it is a in-demand cover. Very similar to 251. I mean, those are books that are really in demand largely for the covers. So it's a 9.8 sold for $19,200. And you might go, wow, you know, that's a lot of money. And it is. It is definitely a lot of money, but it is way down from its peak sale. Its peak sale was $42,000. I thought that this one would drop from there. I had it going for $32,000, but it went way below that. I mean, $19,200, 40% below my estimate. And this is a book that's actually held up very well across most grades from the comic boom. It didn't spike super high. I mean, it did definitely spike, but it spiked and it's held those prices. But this one corrected pretty significantly. Now, it's possible it's the off-white pages. Maybe that hurt it some. But still, this was a pretty significant drop from that peak sale of 42,000, over a 50% drop from that high sale. So just want to point that one out, that definitely an underperformer there. Now, the next one, this one surprised me on the high side quite a bit as well. I wasn't sure what it would go for. I made my guess at it. This is Marvel Superheroes number 20. I mean, To me, this is the best Doom cover of the Silver Age. I love this cover. And see my bid on there. I bid 2,400, wasn't even close. This book sold for 11,400. I thought it would go for 5,500. I mean, beat my estimate by 107%. Prior record was 1,100. Now, it was not a recent sale, but let's go check it out. So, Marvel Superheroes number 20. And we can take a look at a 9.8. And we've got that 9.8 here, where the last sale was 2016. That wasn't even the record. The record was in 2014 for 1,100. 2016, 8 years ago, sold for 1,050. 8 years later now, $11,000. 10 times, a little more than 10, like 11 times as much as that prior sale from 8 years ago. So this was a big, big number for this book. I mean, we had a 9.6 go for 3,200 just in September. We had a 9.4 go for 1,500. So yeah, I mean, it's a tough call. I mean, I wouldn't have been surprised at like 7,000 or even 8,000, but 11,400, definitely a big, big sale. Doesn't come up for sale often, clearly. I mean, let's see how many are on census. Only 5 and a 9.8. So it's not an easy 9.8, but regardless, big sale. Doom is hot right now. I mean, I'm sure that played some role in this as well. But yeah, strong sale for this book. All right. Now, I talked about these in my prior video. It's 2 books. They actually both beat my estimates. We've got Ultimate Fallout 4, the Jurjevic variant, 9.8. This one went back above that 5-figure mark. It had, the last couple sales had been below 10,000. This one at 10,200. I had it estimated at 9,000, so beat my estimate by 13%. I still think this book is a risky buy here. I've said it before a number of times. I could see this book dropping to around $5,000, and so I'm not touching this book around these prices. But somebody won it for 10,200, but a little bit over my estimate of $9,000. The other one, I'm not surprised this one sold for less. I personally did not like the appearance of this book with these signatures and little sketches and on there. This one sold for 9,000, so did go below that 10,000 mark. I had it going for 8,000. I honestly wouldn't have been surprised if it went for lower than that, but also beat my estimate by 13%. So both of them beat my estimate by 13%, but still generally on that trend down. And like I've said, I would be cautious with these books. So I have to talk about this one. I've got to talk about this one here. This is one that I feel like brought up a little bit of controversy. We've got the 9.9 that has graders notes. It's got a spine tick and some soft corners up here and here and down here, but sold for a record for this book, $13,800. I had it going for 12,500. I think my estimate was anywhere from 10 to 15. And so it was within my estimate, but when I take the average of those, which is what I've been doing for this, beat my estimate by 10%. So, I mean, close enough for a 9.9, one of one that had never sold before. Actually just was recently graded. So that's why it had never sold before. But yeah, I mean, 13,800, I feel like you can't be really disappointed with the sale. If you're the seller, you did set the record. I know there was talk of maybe some bigger numbers for this one, but beat my estimate by about 10%. But yeah, 9.9s still go for these, these big premiums. The 9.8, I know there was like a $4,000 sale recently, but it had generally been selling more around, I think, like 2,000. And so this is going for 6 to 7 times what that 9.8 price probably is. So you get these big multiples with these 9.9s. It's definitely true. It all comes down to what the market is willing to pay for them. And, somebody decided they wanted this book for 13,800. There was another 9.9 that sold. There are actually a few, but another one that I priced out, and that was the Spectacular Spider-Man number 78. I estimated this one would sell for 500, sold for 504. So this is one of those examples of a run filler 9.9, and that there's not that much demand for it. It's like, yeah, it's sold for a decent amount. A 9.8 is probably like a $75 or $100 book, something like that. And this one sells for 504. I mean, that's what you're going to get with this type of book. And yeah, you get a premium for it, but it's more of a curiosity at this. It's not a key. And so it's just maybe somebody that wants the opportunity to own at least a vintage 9.9. I mean, this is from 1983, and this is their chance to get it and only cost them $500. All right, so the last book we're going to talk about here, I'm going to close out on this one. This was, you could say it was a low sale, but we'll get into that a little bit as well because it's also a record. This was Detective Comics number 8. So this book, the reason I wanted to talk about this one is that this is another example of a book that it had a huge, huge sale earlier this year, a sale that I personally did not really buy. Like I just, and again, I got to repeat myself in that I'm not saying I think it's like a fraudulent sale or anything like that. When I say that, I feel like it's an outlier sale. Well, in an auction, book that maybe hadn't sold for a while. And so you get a lot of hype around it. And then you start seeing a few copies come up for sale after that. And that fills up that demand. And now you're going to get a lower sale. I mean, I actually, like, if I had been watching at this point, I probably would have bought this book at this price, or at least made somebody pay a little bit more. I mean, it's a Detective Comics number 8. It's a classic cover from 1937, pre-Batman tech. Sold for $5,040 for a 1.5 creamed off white pages. So if we jump over to GPA, you'll see what I'm talking about here. So this book, its prior record was 3,200. So it did set a record in grade. But I thought it would go for 7,500. And that was based on a couple prior sales that we've seen for some restored copies and a universal. Well, actually 2 universals. So we had this sale in March of this year, $17,260 for a 1.8. That was a sale that I believe I talked about in a video that I was just like, I need to see another sale for this book. I don't really think that that's the new baseline for this book. You know, it says 1.8 here, covered attached, 17,260 on Comic Connect. And so then we had this Billy Wright pedigree 7.5 sell for 33,360. That alone to me tells you that this $17,000 sale probably on the high side, because you got a 7.5 going for 33,000 and a 1.8 going for more than half that, and a pedigree. And this, let's take a look at this 7.5. And so this was on Heritage. I mean, this is a beautiful copy, like a beautiful copy of this book. And so I didn't really think that this sale, this 1.8, was repeatable. I did not think that if it came up again in grade that it would sell for this. And that's what we saw. We saw 1.5, very similar grade, very similar presenting copy. Actually, it's hard to tell because this one, if it's just the lighting that makes it look dark, or if this cover is better, I don't know. There's some chipping and everything obviously along the spine, but it's a solid looking 1.5. I mean, based on the colors, if those are actually the colors of that book, I would want this one more. This sold for $5,040. I mean, $12,000 less for approximately the same grade. And so this is another example to me of, it's a rare book. How many people actually want it? Other people got their copies. You had multiple copies then sell, where you had this, the 1.8, you had the 7.5, and there have been some restored copies that I've seen come up for sale. Let's see if they're on here. I don't see them on here, so maybe they're on Comic Link or something, but I have seen a couple restored copies come up as well. And so just the people out there, that want the book, maybe they got their copies. And so this is getting more back down to what that price maybe should be. And so if we look at a 1.5, I mean, you can see here, 2022, you had a $3,700 sale. We had a $2,700 sale. Oh, so I guess, sorry, I had that wrong. The record was 3,700, not 3,200. So, but still set a new record for this book. And you can see that this is probably, to me, around where it should be. And you just have that one big outlier. So always just be cautious when you see something that looks like it's an outlier, that looks like you're like, I don't know if I buy that sale so much that this is the new price. Just wait for another one to sell. I mean, sometimes when it's a rare book like this, you might have to wait a while, but that's where patience can really pay off. Now, maybe if you've got a lot of money and you don't want to wait, like you're willing to pay what you're willing to pay. But if you've got, a little more patience, if you're willing to wait and see what happens, wait for some other issues to come out, then maybe you find yourself getting a much better deal on one of these books. But those are all the books I was going to talk about. I know this is a long video, and I appreciate it if you stuck with me on this. Basically, my overall takeaway from this auction was that on average, this was a pretty strong auction. A little over 60% of the books beat my estimates. I had 20 of the 55 that I priced, so around 40% of the books beat my estimates by more than 20%. So just on average, seemed like a strong sale, at least in this segment of the market, which this is, I mean, this is like mid to upper to extreme high end. Like that's really where this market largely is sitting. I mean, $1,000 plus type books up to, you know, over $1 million for a book. So this is generally the higher end market, and that seems to be pretty strong right now. But hopefully you enjoyed this video. Let me know in the comments. Did you participate in this auction? Did you pick up any books, or were you like me and you ended up as the underbidder on something that that you had really wanted? But hopefully you enjoyed this. If you did, please hit that like button, subscribe button, notification bell, and I will see you on the next one.